Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Classical Academy podcast, your friendly guide to the world of classical Christian education. I'm your host, Dr. Mark Phillips. A bride who dies to live, unexpected romance, a groom deceived by comrades, a buffoonery constable who actually uncovers the truth. My guest today is Jandy Hardesty. She teaches literature for our juniors and seniors here at Trinity, and she is our resident classic film expert. She has a vast knowledge, excellent taste for movies all the way back to the dawn of cinema. In fact, as a teenager, she had memorized the top Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Supporting Actor, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress, also from the dawn of cinema. Pretty impressive mind on this lady. Jandy, thank you and welcome. It's great to have you here.
I'm glad to be here.
So a lot of schools are dropping the study of Shakespeare. And in case you couldn't tell from the introduction, we're looking at something called Much Ado About Nothing, very well-known Shakespearean comedy. And though a lot of schools are dropping it, we do a lot of Shakespeare here, all the way from the 6th grade up. Why do we spend so much time studying Shakespeare?
Right. Well, I think I was trying to figure out how much we actually do Shakespeare. And I think we study 5 or 6 plays by graduation if students have been here since 6th grade. Of course, with 39 plays, the question might be, is that enough? Do we study enough Shakespeare here? But the answer to your question of why we prioritize Shakespeare, we generally prioritize reading the greatest books of the Western world. And you can't leave Shakespeare out of that. He is, there's no greater writer than Shakespeare, especially in the English language.
Sure. Now, why are so many schools dropping Shakespeare?
He's too old, the language is too hard, it's not high interest enough for students who are probably also reluctant readers. What else? We have to deal with the issues of gender politics and racial politics that are different than our day, and bridge that gap for them, and it's difficult.
Well, the good news is difficulty and challenging and stimulating the mind, that is not a reason for not doing anything here at Trinity. That's probably a reason for doing it. So that's wonderful. Now, out of all the wonderful Shakespearean plays, why do we study Much Ado About Nothing?
Right. Well, like I said, we have 39 to choose for. Why this one? We do this in the junior year of Trinity, and the literature theme for junior year is identity. So what is identity? Where does it come from? How is identity formed? Who gets to decide what your identity is? And that's a major theme of Much Ado About Nothing, because many of the characters are either they're masking their own identities for various reasons. They may not know themselves who they are, and they need to be unmasked and live up to who they're supposed to be. Other characters are deceived into thinking people are not who they truly are, and with nearly disastrous consequences.
So I can see how that will help the students. I want to get into that later. Before we do, what's the general context? What do we need to understand in general context when we're reading and studying Much Ado About Nothing?
Well, sure. And I also wanted to mention another reason that we do it is because it's really fun. It is. It is one of the most enjoyable Shakespeare plays.
It's hilarious.
And it combines comedy and it almost turns into a tragedy at one point, in a way that really looks forward to his tragedies while still having that very joyous spirit to it. So it's a lot of fun to read, and that also helps bridge some of that gap with the difficulty of Shakespeare.
That's great.
So context, ahead of time, I mentioned that it is a comedy. Comedy in Shakespeare, it is very witty, it is very funny, but comedy is not necessarily just funny ha-ha jokes all the time.
Right.
So the fact that it has a comedic structure means a lot in Shakespeare. The easy way to define it is the tragedies end with everybody dying and comedies end with everybody getting married. That is true in this case, spoilers.
Sure.
But that comedic structure, and the structure in both comedies and tragedies for Shakespeare really is a bringing order out of disorder. And it's just a question of whether that order will come violently and then a new group of characters comes in to, bring order to the kingdom, as in Macbeth or Hamlet or any of these other ones.
Sure.
Or is it going to end with characters redeemed and joyful and happy and getting married?
Which is certainly the case here. It ends with all the dancing and music and joy over the weddings taking place.
Absolutely. It ends with a wedding feast and a dance, which is how eternity ends.
Yes.
So it mirrors very closely the gospel story. A lot of fairy tales tell the same story. And we do fairy tales in 11th grade too. So the piling on of this type of story being told really helps them to see that this is our story. Yes. Our story doesn't end in a tragedy. Our story, we start off good in the Garden of Eden, and then we fall, and things get really bad for a while.
Yes.
But then there's redemption, and we end up actually even better than we were in Eden. We have a more glorious future. And that is the story that Much Ado About Nothing tells.
Oh, and how fabulous to be studying and contemplating identity and one's own identity in the midst of all that, the identity of who we are as a human race before the fall, after, what we're looking forward to, those who are redeemed. What a marvelous thing. Well, let's look at some of the key turning points. I don't want to spoil the ending or anything. I mean, we've already kind of let the cat out of the bag. There's weddings at the end, but it's Shakespeare. I don't think that's any big revelation. But what's kind of the general plot line? What are the key turning points in Much Ado About Nothing?
All right. Well, we start off on an estate in Italy with a group of men returning from a successful war. They're ready for rest. They're ready for love. They're ready to fall in love and have a time of feasting and joy. And so love blossoms between two young characters, Claudio and Hero, who is a girl. She is the daughter of the estate's owner. And so that's one of our main plots, is their young love. And then we also have a secondary romantic couple, Benedict and Beatrice, and they have a merry war betwixt them.
Yes.
They have known each other before, and they just trade witticisms and barbs and insults, some of the best insults you will ever hear. And so we have their plot on one side and Hero and Claudio on the other side. And then we have a villain who comes in. And he deceives Claudio into thinking that Hero has been unfaithful, that she has been, even before they're married, that she has been unfaithful to him. And he believes this lie, this deception, to the point that Hero, as you mentioned in your little tagline opening, Hero has to die, in a sense, in order to come back as the person that she really is. And meanwhile, the other characters trick Benedict and Beatrice into falling in love with each other. Or at least, should we say, admitting their love for each other, that they maybe had hidden from themselves even.
I want to ask you something about that. Would a playgoer at the time, when they saw these two characters being somewhat familiar with Shakespeare, would they be thinking, I wonder if these two who seem obsessed with one another and tearing one another down with their witticisms, I wonder if something's going to develop between them? Because I know that was certainly my thought, but then I'm trying to wonder, what would someone originally seeing it at the time of Shakespeare, would they have had the same kind of thing, thinking about those two?
I suspect that they would. Us looking back, obviously, it's very easy because this is kind of a template for romantic comedies, that we see two characters who are antagonistic toward each other, and we immediately think, they're going to be the ones that fall in love.
There's one made every year.
Yeah, exactly. But there's a lot of little hints in the text that I think suggest that they have had a romantic relationship in the past.
Yeah.
And that their hatred for each other is not really hatred.
Yeah.
I think there's clues in the text that let us know that this is likely to be a love match in the end.
And the playgoers at his time, they were pretty savvy. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And Shakespeare based, his plays they're very, the way he does things is very original, but they're often based on existing sources and existing tropes and trends, and he repeats things a lot. Like there's a plot section in this that's very similar to a plot section in Romeo and Juliet, but it turns out differently here.
Yes.
So one thing that he does throughout is just try to take some of the same elements and replay them again. So I can't imagine that this type of relationship hadn't been seen on the stage at that point.
Yes, very good. And one character we haven't mentioned yet, who I find fascinating, is Dogberry, the constable. And he's kind of used to reveal a very important truth in this play. Can you talk about him a little bit?
Sure. So Dogberry comes in about halfway through the play. He's the town constable, as you said. He has several people under him who are the town watch. And Dogberry speaks in malapropisms.
Yes, malapropisms, folks. Write that down.
He uses words that are very similar to what they're supposed to be, but they're not quite right. And this can be a little bit difficult for students to catch. They oftentimes don't catch the comedy of Dogberry right away because they're trying to figure out what word he is trying to say.
Yes, we were talking before the podcast about Yogi Berra being another one who does this. He says, that state's so big, they have a lot of electrical votes. That's a malapropism, yes?
Yes, exactly. And Dogberry uses that. And one problem is that Shakespeare's language is elevated enough that even with these low comedy characters, the words that he is trying to use are oftentimes above the student's head. So I'm like, he's trying to say this, and they're like, wait, what's that? But
good learning, learning.
Yes, exactly. Yes. But Dogberry is very interesting because in a play that is about, to a great degree, wit and saying things that are funny. He's a character who almost can't say things. He's funny because he can't say things correctly.
Yes.
Yet he wants to try to communicate, and he is the one that communicates the big truth.
He's the vehicle for the revelation.
Yes, he brings the truth back and uncovers that deception from the villain that allows things to come out right in the end.
Fantastic. Oh, now Jandy, there seems to be a lot going on in this play, yet it's titled Much Ado About Nothing, but it seems to be a lot of something going on. What's the deal with this title?
Well, you could say it's Much Ado About Nothing in the sense that the main deception that drives the plot is about something that didn't happen, right? So that is a nothing thing. But it's actually, as we have said, it's much ado about a lot in other ways.
Yes.
It's about identity. It's about who you are. It's about who you can trust and how you build your community to be people that you can trust. And how do you discern truth from falsehood and from deceit? And also different kinds of deceit. Because we have two deceptions going on in the two different plots.
So there's like two deception plot lines here. You know, what's the deal there? What do you talk to the students about with that? And I know I want to get into how it forms the students in a minute, but what are these two? What about those two plot lines? These two deceptions.
So on the one hand, we have the deception of Claudio by the villain, who makes him think that his soon-to-be wife is not a pure woman, not a true woman, and that she's been unfaithful. And that's a deception that's completely based in lies, that's not true about her at all. And yet, in the subplot, we have another deception where we're trying to convince Benedict and Beatrice that they actually do love each other. But the twist is they do love each other.
Yes.
So that deception is actually unveiling a deeper truth about those two characters and what their relationship should be.
And I guess a whole discussion comes about by the whole fact does Claudio really is in his good mind to even believe this deception, that she's not pure. And that's probably a huge part of your classroom discussion. I don't know, but is it?
Yes, it is. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Why does Claudio believe this so easily about someone that he professedly loves, right? When you love someone, you should trust them,
Yes.
right? I mean, that is
You
kind
should
of...
know better.
You should know better.
Yeah.
And he doesn't. He's painted as kind of a naive young guy who's easily impressionable. But still, and then he takes the worst possible time to try to deal with this situation in the middle of the wedding.
Oh, boy.
And
Yeah.
so it's kind of like he's easily deceived and he's also a jerk.
Yeah, yeah, right. And we know at weddings how they fit into the whole biblical picture, and it's not a very good time to do this. So you have these great discussions, and how do you see this forming the students? How does studying Much Ado About Nothing form them?
Well, there's a number of ways. One thing is just helping them see these plots and how they relate to each other. I mean, that's just a good part of good reading, but play like Much Ado About Nothing that gives us two very clearly related plots like this helps to see, if the deception is okay in this case, but it's not okay in this case, is deception ever okay? If it's unveiling a deeper truth, that makes a difference.
Yeah,
or does
that's
it make a
great
difference,
discussion.
right? I mean, you can do a whole class right there. You just
Sure.
throw that out there. They'll talk for an hour on that.
Yeah, deception in love and war. That's like a topic, isn't it?
Right. So what I try to help them see also, though, is this comic structure that we talked about before. And also to see the characters as, in a way, types, that they represent certain character traits or aspects of a story. So students will often want to completely psychologize the characters the way we would do in a 20th century novel. And Shakespeare just doesn't work like that.
Yes.
The characters are more typological. They represent things. So Claudio represents the character who needs to be redeemed. And it can be very difficult for them to see that because at the point where he is almost attacking Hero at the wedding, they dislike Claudio intensely.
Yes.
As you should, right?
He's fallen into the deceivableness of sin, hasn't
Yes.
he?
And then the question is, can a character like that be redeemed? Is that a redeemable character? And if so, what form does that redemption need to take? And so helping them follow along that journey and see its relationship to the gospel and to our life as Christians, as people who have fallen hard and need to be redeemed without deserving it, is a big leap for some of them to take. And so I think that's a big way that it helps them to see that.
So let's say I have a student who's got the wonderful benefit and the great privilege to be studying Much Ado About Nothing with you. What question or what questions should I ask them about Much Ado About Nothing?
So do ask them about these two deceptions. Have this hour-long conversation with your teen. Are there ever deceptions that are good, or what would have to be the case for it to be good? Now, we may come down on the side of we never want to lie, we never want to deceive people. Shakespeare clearly seems to say that it's okay in this case. It ends up with a good outcome. So do the ends justify the means? Is there something deeper going on here? And I think there's a level, especially with a writer like Shakespeare, that we need to submit to the text a little bit just to make sure we know what he's doing before we outright reject what he is telling us.
And what is deception? I mean, were they really deceiving Beatrice when they said Benedict loves her? Were they really deceiving him?
They're actually telling them truths about each other, right? And even they're, in a sense, they're also telling them hard truths about themselves. Beatrice is too disdainful. If she would stop being so disdainful, then she could see the love that Benedict has for her. And Beatrice immediately hears that and is like, oh, I kind of am too disdainful. So they're telling her hard truths about herself as well as actual truths about Benedict.
Sure. Now, you actually read this in its original language, and people say, isn't that too hard? Isn't that too difficult? Why do we do that? Why don't we take the NIV version instead of the King James?
Well, if you take away Shakespeare's words, I'm not going to say you've completely taken away Shakespeare, but you've taken away a lot of him. There's nobody who has had more influence on the English language than Shakespeare, and trying to dumb him down is just a travesty in general. But, there's a lot of versions out now, like No Fear Shakespeare and things like that. And it's like, well, you don't need to fear Shakespeare. You just you have to work at it a little bit harder. We do use editions that have very good notes right alongside.
Fabulous.
So I encourage them to do that. As we're reading, I'll stop and make sure that they understand what we've said. A lot of the jokes do need to be explained a little bit because they reference things that we don't know anymore.
Now, we certainly encourage the listeners to take on the challenge, read through it, do it with some good notes. That being said, are there any, since you're a cinema buff, and I should say cinema expert, are there any cinema versions that you would recommend, knowing that they fall short of the actual play itself? Because I think it would be great for people to at least start there.
Well, see, here's the thing. We read Shakespeare, but Shakespeare is meant to be seen.
Yes.
Theatrically, it's meant to be seen, produced. If you have the opportunity to see a production live on the stage of Shakespeare, that's the best way to do it. That's better than reading it. Sure. Read it alongside so make sure you get all the language. But I have no problem with cinematic adaptations of Shakespeare because that's our version of how people would have been experiencing them originally.
Sure.
The 1993 version, directed by Kenneth Branagh, with Branagh and Emma Thompson, is excellent. Fabulous. It's not quite word for word, but it almost is. They don't cut out very much. They shift a couple scenes around to different places to make it cinematic. But other than that, it's very excellent, and they get the words just right. And
fantastic.
That's the one I would recommend.
That's great. Okay, you have your instructions from the teacher. At least start there, but end up going to an actual production. It would be worth it. Jandy, this has been fantastic. I could go on for another hour hearing more and more because this is much to do about a lot,
yes.
Isn't it?
So could I.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being with us. You've been a wonderful guest.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. And thank all of you for joining us on the Classical Academy podcast, presented by Trinity U, a service of Trinity Classical Academy, right here in Santa Clarita, California. Our producer is Shay Ramquist. Stephen Petrie is our audio engineer and provides our original music. Until next time, let's all continue to grow in wisdom, in virtue, and in the love of God. God bless you. Thanks for being with us.